Good evening. Hello again from Pipers'Persuasion. In the latest episode, number 89, we briefly discuss the evolving of medley playing by pipe bands over the decades from 1970. In the last episode we did a tribute to Shotts and Dykehead Pipe Band, and that has a full performance of that 1970 winning medley. As a taster, we open now with a small part of that tribute performance. This is followed by contributions from Ken Stewart and others regarding the 70s, and we developed that discussion through Bill Livingston and Jim Work. Finally, Duncan Nicholson assists with his thoughts on the last decade or so, and we close with a small part of the drone chorus recording of Police Scotland and Federation Pipe Band competing at Arena 1, the same arena as the tribute band played in at this year's 2022 World Pipe Band Medley competition. As usual, we hope that you find this episode interesting, and we also take this opportunity to thank all those who appeared and supported the production of this episode. So sit back and enjoy as usual. Thank you.
Pipe majors and leading drummers had to put together a program. Normally you had 2/4 march, you had Strathspey, you had reel, and then these pipe majors and leading drummers had to put a program whereby you had marches, slow airs, dance Strathspeys, 2-part Strathspeys, dance reels, introducing also jig and hornpipe, and as well as that, a degree of harmony was introduced as well, and slow airs. And that's what took place at that time. We have researched and looked at the style of play at that time, and there was quite a difference in styles between bands. Shotts had their style of playing. The Shotts was a big, broad sound. Edinburgh Police was a very refined sound, a different style of playing, and also different drum scores to it as well. Dysart and Dundonald introduced a completely new dynamic to the Pipe Band Medley. And then, of course, Strathclyde Police, this was the start of the run for that famous run, 6 in a trot and 13 championships overall. So the 70s was a time when you had pipe majors and leading drummers who were really experimenting with the music and growing the repertoire. The people who instigated the medley realised just what they were doing, they just how it was going to progress and how it was going to develop and evolve. And as I say, what we've done is we've researched the different performances of different bands, and every band had their own wee quirk. For example, the Edinburgh Police, if you listen carefully to the performances that they had at the very start of the 70s, they had a slight pause before the E was introduced. the introduction was 5, it was the drones, 7 was the E on the chanter, 9 you started the tune. Edinburgh Police had this slight pause. Now, we've asked some of the players that played in the Edinburgh Police, how did you do this? And they said it just happened naturally. So that's the things that we're picking up. And then Desert and Dundonald did the same thing, only theirs was more pronounced. So every band had their own characteristic sound, their own characteristic style of playing. I mean, one of the great things about it is when you, we couldn't see it at the time, but when you sit now in retrospect and you reverse engineer the performances, and you just see the talent that McAllister and Dothert had, that Ian MacLeod and Bob Montgomery had, that Ian McLennan and Alec Connell had, that Bob Shepherd and Jimmy King had, you understand, and also Bob Hardy and Bob Turner.
Yeah.
When you look back at it over the years, and you can see just what these people were doing, the way they were using the drum scores, and the way they were approaching the ensemble, which was a completely new concept.
Yes.
And we've been very, very fortunate that we were able to get very accurate drum scores done by John Scullion. John Scullion drummed along with Alec Dothert, and also was played in the shots at the time. And it took quite a bit of time and effort for John to pull it all together. But he's done it in such a fashion that it's reproducing the Dothert scores, and he's able to talk about how Dothert influenced the piping
more than he did at times, because the memory would have he would maybe have forgotten little bits, you see, in the performance, and then he would look down the line, and we would be going like this here. But the rule was that if that happened, that we would all come in with the correct double 40 part.
Aye.
And that goes the way.
And maybe you should explain a wee bit about that concept to the viewers from Pipers'Persuasion that are not au fait with the piano double 40, all that sort of stuff.
Yes, well, the piano and double 40 was, the piano was the leading drummer's part, and indeed, in Alec Dothert's case, it started off, there was no unison in Donald Cameron, so that means that the drummers would come in and out the first time over the part, and then
That's the first 8 bars, the first time you play the 8 bars.
That's right.
These 8 bars had to be repeated, and that completed part 1 out of maybe 4-party tune or a 6-party tune even.
Yes, exactly. And then, so there would be little passages of unison that would help accent the tune's direction or the beatness direction of the melody. And then over the years, them passages got shorter, but a lot more often. Till nowadays, you don't know that the double 40 should have been the loudest part. And nowadays, you don't know, if you didn't know the piano double 40 regime, you wouldn't know whether it was piano double 40 or not, because the whole thing's clouded with too much unison. The leading drummer is playing least on his own nowadays than he ever did before. And and indeed, in double 40, there's still, there's in reels and things like that now, they're even the snare players, the leading drummer is still doing a couple of bars now at the end of some double 40 parts,
Aye. So you think, is there a chance that the whole thing's becoming too clever now, or what?
Well, it's not too clever. I wouldn't say too clever, but I would say that there's less variety of rudiments.
Aye.
There's less definitive drumming. There's less roll top separation, because accented rolls, whereby the accent isn't the loudest, and by word and deed that should be the case, but it doesn't happen. And on downbeats or strong beats, sometimes that's when the drums are most quiet. And if you listen to this conversation now, and you'll see that from different points there, my accent is by duration and pitch, like a newsreader. And if I was to talk the way a lot of drummers play today, I would be saying, Alan, I am here talking to you this day. You know, Alan, it's the Jack and Jill went up the hill and Baba Black Sheep. Now against, I wandered lonely as a cloud. You see, and it's a different thing.
So they're not telling a story, they're not phrasing, they're not pointing and cutting. Everyone's a straight through, even sort of performance of notes. Is that another summation?
Well, it's a wee bit. The difference now is that people would remember Duthard beatings for what it did to the tune, to the melody.
Yeah.
Nowadays, the bands, there's never been as many good players and great players as there is now. That's through better teaching as well. But if you listen to a band, there's not a bit of drumming that you could pick out among it, because it's all like the same.
Aye.
You know, so you wouldn't remember. If I was listening to a band now, I couldn't pick out a part. Oh, I like that wee bit there. That was brilliant. And this, that, and other. You couldn't pick that out now because it's in a phase whereby it's lending itself to the melody, but it's not directing it in any way. Some people would see that as a good thing.
As on a personal observation of your own, how, if you're standing listening to first grade now, just outside the field, wherever, the arena, do you find it attractive? Do you find it boring, or do you find it invigorating? Now, what's emotion do you have when you're listening to pipe bands in first grade now?
Well, I've went about for a good few years now, and I watch and listen, and then I watch when the crowd's talking, and that tells you an awful lot. So you have a great opening tune, and then you maybe a couple of jigs, everything's great, and then you hit the slow air, and then about 3 or 4 bars of the slow air, then people start talking, right? And then where the worst bit is for me is after a beautiful melodic slow air with appropriate seconds, very beneficial, and then they break into a suspect, and the suspect is a low note, downtrodden suspect, and everybody switches off. They're talking.
Yeah.
They're talking all the time. You've heard this many a time yourself.
Oh, aye, huh?
And then they start into a reel. And then about the second part of the reel, there's not a mute, because they love it again. And then they finish off with a hornpipe, and it makes all the sounds before that easily forgiven.
Aye. So if you get a good finisher, then folks start clapping at the end and all that sort of stuff. But middle part of the performance takes quite a dip in your view from a listener's perspective.
Yeah.
Aye.
But there's many happy suspects and like all these tunes and reels and everything else and marches. Well, a march can be a medley thing or an MSR. And a reel can be an MSR thing or a medley thing.
Yeah.
But a strathspey is always a strathspey.
And you like it played up, don't you?
Well, it has to be happy. I think too many pipers now in general that the critique used to separate bands now, like strong weak, medium weak. Now, strong weak, medium weak does not work, Alan. It does not work. It's the old textbook. Always think of threes. If you do 2 bars of strathspey, you only think of 7 notes. Tom McAllister would have went down maybe a rhythm with his heel, where he would, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, he would have went. See, and that left, and it made it a happy strathspey, and no over punctuation. Pipers now are afraid of the critique that they'll get if they play a happy, uplifting strathspey.
It's got to be a flowing tune as well.
Yes,
absolutely. And how would a Highland dancer respond?
Well, that's a good point. Excellent point. When the dancer jumps up, you can't say, "Oh, stay there now till I'm ready with a deep throat."
I did a wee bit of ensemble judging at home, but I never did it in Scotland. But in piping, I preferred to judge March the Spain Rain because I knew the tunes. The medleys, especially in the later years, you were hit with tunes that you'd never heard in your life before. And they weren't all good tunes to my mind. A lot of unmusical tunes, a lot of finger exercises, a lot of round hornpipes and reel playing, which I detest. As bands still do it. And while I was judging, I penalised them for it. It wasn't right.
You must have despaired at times at the lack of music and some of the medleys you were listening to latterly.
Well, if I felt a tune was unmusical, I would have commented that there was a lack of melodic content. I remember on one top grade 1 band sheet, I think it was a jig they were playing, and I said, "This is just a jumble of notes." Well, that's all it was. It was a jumble of notes. Again, a lot of bands were guilty of too much harmony, especially in hornpipes and reels. In fact, just this year at one of our local competitions, I heard a band, grade 3 band, I think it was, harmonising on a jig. And the impression I got was somebody is playing an entirely different tune here. There was no harmony. It was just a clash of notes.
Do you think it's because they maybe go and they learn music and they learn how to play guitars and accordions and pianos along with the pipes, and they think they've got a wonderful knowledge of music and how to write music, that just because they can do it, it means that they've got to do it, rather than having the patience just to say, no, that I know I can do it, but I don't need to do it, and I'm not going to.
Now, if you're going to use harmony on a tune, what you need to do is say 4 papers, chunder's well set. Right, play the medley, play the melody, and one say, here's the harmony, I'm going to start and go through it. Is there any clash of notes? can you change it? And you know, particularly like, let's say, bass to low Gs. So if it's going to be a B, don't use the low G, use a D. One of the things we did, one of the squares we played in the band was the wee old Gaelic air, Mary of the Bewitching Eyes. And against the low A, I used an F. And it worked. Okay. Instead of using the C, we used an F. We just tinkered about what worked and what didn't work.
But you weren't over embellishing the whole thing. You were still allowing the front music to come out, and it was merely decorated in the background by harmonies and counterpoints rather than being overwhelmed by it.
Okay, some bands, I'll not name, but some bands try as well as the harmony, the counter melody. And if you're going to do a counter melody, it has to be very, very carefully thought out. Because that's where you can get a clash. And one or two bands do it very effectively. Funny enough, going back into the late 70s, very early 80s, Desert and Dundonald did, they finished one of their medleys with an arrangement of the Bluebells of Scotland.
Okay.
And they had a counter melody. And it was beautiful, but it was so well worked out. It was absolutely beautiful.
But Shepherd was in charge of that at that time, was that correct?
Oh, aye, Bob was alive and well then. Oh, yes.
Of course, and he was a maths teacher, so he would get that right,
Well, you know, it was clever, the way it was done.
He was very clever, Bob.
Oh, he was.
You in 1970 were Pipe Sergeant, City Glasgow Police Pipe Band under Ronnie Laurie. What's your recollection of the medley in advance of that performance? Have you any recollection of the tunes or anything like that we played that day?
To be truthful, I can't remember one tune we played in that medley. I know, but beforehand, Ronnie and I had a lot of discussion because Ronnie actually had some good ideas.
Yes.
You know, when you think about what bands are playing now, back then Ronnie had some really good ideas about the whole thing. In fact, he even at one point suggested that halfway through the performance, we should have the drummers playing on their own, a wee interlude. And then the pipers come back in again and things like that. And some of these tune selections were absolutely brilliant, I thought. But then I said to myself, but Ronnie, we're playing in front of guys that are your age now.
Aye, correct.
That might be some of the stuff you want to play might be too far ahead of them. And
yeah, aye, because it was early days, and aye.
And a lot of them were pretty conservative in their ideas about what a medley probably should sound like. So we kind of worked it out basically in the way that the medleys did work out in the end. You try and find a nice introductory tune, and then you would break into the space and reels, and then you would have slow air and hornpipes, jigs, and that kind of format. So that's just the way it planned out at the end of the day. I think most bands, would have come up with the same idea.
You know what I'm going to say? I think that was my last season in the band. And I think I remember playing at Aberdeen that day.
Aye.
And I'll tell you who was playing beside me was Joe Wilson, ex-Gordon Highlanders. Joe was there, and Willie Fortune was the other side of me.
Willie Fortune would have been there right enough. Aye.
Aye, right. And another thing I seem to remember us practicing was the two wee reels. And one was a kind of nameless reel. Dumbity, diddy, 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 he had a dumbity, diddy, diddy,
Aye. I remember.
You remember that?
I remember that tune. Aye.
And Banjo Breakdown, did we not play that at some?
Aye, because that was one of Big Ronnie's favourite tunes. He used to give you a jig verse and a hornpipe verse.
When years in medleys developing in the City of Glasgow Police Pipe Band in your early years as pipe major.
Aye, well, that started in January 72 that Big Ronnie retired from the pipe majorship. He's still in the police. And I took over the band from him then in January. So obviously at that point in time we had a lot of work to do between then and the middle of May when the season started. So I think I stayed, if I remember rightly, I stayed with the MSRs that we played. I was quite happy with the MSRs the band was playing. But obviously you've got to start using your own imagination as far as medleys were concerned. From 72 to 75, I don't really have any recollection of what we actually played in the medleys in the days. I used to make recordings of everything, and I would give the recordings to Alec, and Alec would then propose the scores, give us a good ensemble effect. I used to make recordings of everything, and I would give the recordings to Alec, and Alec would then propose the scores, give us a good ensemble effect. He helped us on a great deal. In fact, my first year as pipe major of the band, Alex Corr won the world's drum corps championship.
Yeah.
And that boosted the drum corps. But the drum corps at that time were a bit, thin in the ground. He was always struggling to keep players. And there was Alex, there was Still McMurtry, there was John Wally.
Yeah.
And
Kennedy.
John Kennedy, Ian Kennedy.
Yeah.
That was the drummers in these days. And they were there probably right up to into the late 70s, and then we started getting other guys in. Well, we got the lad, oh God, what's his name again? Charlie Simpson from Greenock. He was with the Renfrew and Butte.
Yeah, that was the regionalisation.
Aye. And then no long after that, we got, I think we got, what do you call him? Roddy Darragh. And then Wally Corkindale, another excellent drummer. Some good young guys in, and that boosted the drum corps quite a bit. There was guys left and there was guys came in, but the ones that came in are a lot better players than the ones that left.
I'm quite sure.
No, the guys, well, I mean, the first year as pipe major, actually, I got John Wilson, Jimmy Watt, and a guy called Davy Perry, who came out to Scots Cards, an excellent player, very, very good player. And then the following year, I got Harry McAleer.
Right.
Another good player. And then the regionalisers came, Barry Donaldson came from Lanarkshire. And the other guy I couldn't remember his name was Sid Spence. And Jim Payne, they came from Renfrew. So they were all good players, So they boosted the band went, and then I could start a bit more adventurous with the material that we were playing. But as I said already, it was probably into the early 80s before I really started to say, well, probably in the 70s, I was a wee bit more conservative because I said to myself, if I start playing tricky stuff here, I'm going to struggle with the integration. Because so a lot of the guys in the band at that time couldn't handle it. So they couldn't play it. They couldn't play it quick enough, you know.
Aye.
So I was a wee bit I was quite conservative at that point. It was when we went into the 80s that I probably started to become a wee bit more adventurous with this material we were playing, and it was a bit more difficult. But at the same time, it was catchy.
Well, I played in the General Motors band because Oshawa, where it was based, is only a few miles from my home, and it was the pipe major of the band was, I think, a man you know well, George Campbell. Yeah, and a great pal of mine. So it was a convenient thing to do, and I was only a piper in the band, and I didn't really participate in selecting music at all. But at that time, there wasn't much in the way of choosing. It seemed to be, you could start with anything, a 2/4 two-parted march and a strathspey and a couple of reels, and finish off with a 4/4 march, and it was pretty yawny stuff, really.
Yeah. The early days of the judges in medley, they hadn't a clue what they were judging or how you judge it.
No.
Am I right with it?
Oh no, I agree with you. I mean, it was just a string of modest-sized tunes. And some of them are really nice, but there was no really effort to make a statement musically about anything. It was just getting the tunes together, and so now what we've progressed to, I think, is a perfection, an almost unreal perfection of tonal quality, and that's probably a lot to do with all the modern changes that have come about in the instrument, and an intense focus on bands being able to do that. I mean, you don't get to play in a good grade 1 band unless you're a really good player. So right off the top, everything has changed that way. There used to be a great spot for the fella who could blow tone, but maybe not make all the grace notes. Not anymore.
They had umpteen in the back ranks, didn't play grace notes or anything, just blew the tone, blew the medley and all that sort of stuff. Spence is a guy, it just comes off the top of my head, but these guys did very well, and it was only 12, 14 pipers in the band, so it's good for the pipe major to be able to blend in all these chaps and just come away with winning performances. But as you say, nowadays you've got 25 gold medalists, that playing in the top grade 1 bands and all that sort of stuff,
Yeah, and by this time it's 1980. And we get the sponsorship for the 78th Fraser Highlanders. So suddenly we have a pipe band, and into this group come some amazing people. Michael Gray, Bruce Gandy, John Walsh, who you undoubtedly know, and Jerry Quigg, who you may not know, but who was instrumental in my development. One of the most famous openers we ever played was the Mason's Apron, and we called it the Mason's Apron Medley. And we played that at the Live in Ireland in Glasgow a couple of years ago. And it was, again, Jerry Quigg, Jerry's an Irish guy. Right. And he lived some of his early years in Ireland. Then he moved to Philadelphia with his dad and came to Canada because of the Vietnam War and the draft. Anyway, so he was in love with Irish music for obvious reasons, and he came across a recording by a band called Horselips. What a wonderful name for a band. And they played the Mason's Apron in exactly the format we lifted, with the slow day, all that kind of stuff, and then breaking right into it. That was revolutionary. It was completely over the top. And then the rest of that medley was entirely consisted of tunes in a minor key, every single one of them, and yet they weren't glum and boring and dark, you know. And then Mist-Covered Mountains, and in the middle of it all, Ian Morrison's great reel, The Nest Pipers, and then we finished off with the little Cascade. It was so satisfying to play. Fabulous music, just wonderful. And when it was all over, a drum major type guy came over to our band bus. We were all standing around having a jar, and he had the swagger. He was just the typical swagger stick kind of guy, you know, tucked up under the oxter. And Pipe Major, you'll be pleased to know you have not been disqualified. I said, well, excuse me, why are you coming to tell me a negative? I mean, if I'm not disqualified, leave me alone. I said, so anyway, why? And he said, well, your opening tune. I said, what was wrong with it? He said, well, it's just not on. Well, I said, okay, well, whatever. Of course, we got absolutely ripped.
I remember listening to Ian MacLeod. I think he was doing the sort of commentary, but, you know, in the BBC, that Bob Worrell does now, you know, and Ian MacLeod, I'm sure, this is a lot of years ago, you know, but I'm sure he lost a rag with this one and says, where are we going with this? No, this can't carry it. And I'm saying, what's the problem, you know? I don't know if you heard his views on it that particular day, but I thought it was a bit sore, you know.
Well, the thing is that's so amazing is that the RSPBA set about to establish some rules. And the rules were you would start with 2 3-piece rolls, which we did. And you would play at, what did they call it? A quick tempo or a marching tempo, I don't know, of not less than 60 beats a minute, which is exactly what we did. So, you know, it was the irony is they gave themselves a mental hernia over what we did and then just incorporated what we did as the rule. Really strange stuff. Very, very much so. I thought it was crazy. And in Ontario, we did away with a whole lot of those things because the rules were much more relaxed. So we used to be able to start in a concert formation crescent with the drum corps in the middle and start up with whatever typically it would be like a love song, and then form into formation and march in. And there would be no opening rolls or anything of that kind. And, you know, I have some very particular thoughts about the role of the RSPBA in the piping and pipe bands and how it's not doing the art an awful lot of good. I think we're going a little bit over the top. I'm in love with it. I'm in love with the blend, and I'm in love with what you can do to create a mood musically with harmony. But I'm really not nuts about playing jigs and hornpipes in full harmony. There's a place for it, but it's like alcohol. You better be careful how you use it because, you can just overdo it and ruin the effect.
The reason I'm asking, because your band, maybe Vale of Athol, I don't know, But your band certainly were very, very well renowned for the use of harmony, counterpoint, this, that, and the next thing, blending into, especially your concert pieces and everything else. So you obviously know when it's appropriate, but others seem to put it into every tune in their performance, and
Yes.
they're right. Well, we're losing the medley, but what's the tune? Where's the tune? You know.
Yes, exactly. And they're losing the impact of some harmony, because, you know, that's when you use it, is to create an emotional response, a special response that you get. And also, when you overuse it, you lose the incredible beauty of chanters in perfect tone and drones with a magic cloud of sound over everything.
Yeah.
Because there's, you know, when you play in unison, whew, it's pretty beautiful. So, and then Jerry Quigg came to the band, and I'll never forget standing outside the beer tent at a blazing hot summer games, you know, in Southern Ontario. And Jerry was warbling Lagan Love Song to me. And me and Brian Pollock, actually, and I was stunned by this. What the name of heaven is that? Well, that just led to a whole way of thinking about these things and approaching them. No, there was no deliberate plan as such, you know, it was all very organic and kind of natural. And I wasn't sort of restricted by any kind of imaginary boundaries or rules or that sort of stuff. And then Michael and Bruce began composing. I was doing some composing. We brought that stuff in. And we didn't really have, I think I would have to say, we didn't have a goal other than to play music that we thought was really great. And Jerry had been playing with Cabernet under Chris Anderson, a really, really fine player. And Jerry brought some wonderful ideas to the Cabernet Pipe Band. And for example, he was instrumental in bringing Pibroch into the repertoire. So they built medleys in and around Pibroch. So they had The Desperate Battle. So Jerry had this butty, just the variation, right? But
Yeah.
then this clever transition to da-dee da-dee dum bro da shati dum da-dee dum bro da dum da-dee dum bro dum. Terrific stuff. And then he also encouraged Chris, who was a very traditional guy, but clearly forward-thinking, to include Macintosh's Lament.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, get this variation, he, and do, and then that just blew me away.
Yeah, I found the medley thing very interesting because you were doing stuff that you'd never done before. And I remember one of the first practices I attended with the Glasgow Police, there was a tune called Muir of Ord that we were learning. But the way they said it, I thought it was Gaelic. It came out like Muir of Ord. And the interesting thing for me about the medleys is that it got people thinking in a different direction eventually from the standard classic March to Spain reel format, and opened the door for being imaginative, being creative, and doing things that were completely different from what a band you, as a soloist, you would go and entertain some people or play in the solo knockout competition and play a whole barrel load of stuff. But in pipe bands, you had to be careful. You're out there to win a competition, but in the likes of the knockout contest, you were there really to entertain people. I felt play well, good instrument, but entertain people. And I think that kind of amalgamated itself into pipe band world very well. And the interesting thing for me is that, as far as I know, for the most part, Ian McClellan picked all the pieces or worked on them anyway. And I was really impressed with the wide variety of things that we did. And of course, I'm a great admirer of Angus Laurie and the work that he did. Who would have thought that he would have started a contest selection with a 12/8? These are things that happened. And I
What was the name of the 12/8, Jim?
I think it was the 78 Police Tattoo.
Okay.
And I think that's really one of the difficulties is the March to Spain real classic format. All the tunes were there for you. You weren't breaking new ground or anything like that. You just picked what you thought would do the job, but breaking new ground and being imaginative and remembering that there's a drum corps behind you and they should be involved in it. One of the things that I always did when I was the pipe major and when I was working with other bands was to work with the leading drummer to make sure that the tunes provided them with the rhythmic variety that they needed. Because when you finger tap a lot of tunes, the same rhythm comes out all the time. There are choices that you have to make about the types of tunes, the standard of them, what they're going to be like and how the drum corps is going to do it. And if the band has to play simpler tunes for effect, then the drummers have to adapt to that. And it's one of the things too that I feel that opened up the gates eventually for what we have now in the likes of grade 4B and stuff like that, where you play 4 two-parted marches. The same questions arise there. Are they the right standard for the pipe corps? Is the tempo you're using and the rhythm that you've got and the expression you've got, is that working for the tunes? And one of the big things about arranging medleys is tonality, going from one kind of scale to the next kind of scale. So you might play, just for argument's sake, Highland Laddie, and then go to the 79th Farewell because it's a different tune selection for scale-wise. And then you might play Cabernet because you're going from kind of a B scale to an A scale to a G scale as well. And also remembering too that the structure of the tunes, if you play a very complex tune at the beginning, the chances are you might be careful with the tempo, but when the simpler tunes come out after it, they will sound a little slow because they're not as lively technically as the other tune is.
Did you notice a big change in the content of medley from the beginning of the 70s to the end of the 70s? Because really that's what they should be talking about as well, you know?
Well, it's interesting because we've got traditional music called strathspeys and reels, and they're part of the medley performance. Because as a traditional musician, whether you're in a bagad or not, you have to play the traditional music the traditional way, which is also good for pipers and drummers to understand. However, I think that there's a lot of changes that happened. For example, one of them for me was, I think it was the 78th with Bill Livingston that played the Fox Hunters jig.
Aye.
Because he got to it before I did, because I was thinking the same thing and they came out and did it. When they changed the rhythm of it from and I just thought it was great that they did that.
Yeah, aye.
And the good thing about it too is the evolution of the medley presented people with imagination to be creative and write new music. And you weren't being criticised because in a March to Spain Reel competition, you'd written a march called Alan Hamilton of Allardyce or something like that, you know.
Aye.
Everybody was saying, what's this? I've never heard this before. And one of the things that I loved about the old days was that somebody would say to you, "Oh, I heard you playing today, but that's not the way I was taught the tune."
Yeah.
Because if it's a Masters Bay and Reel competition, and in the old days, I had judged like 35 bands in a one grade. And if it's an MSR and they're all playing kind of the same tunes, it's quite a long day to do that. Whereas with the medleys, it adds a bit of magic to the day by providing you with different ideas and concepts.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there were, and even today, I'm sure there are judges who hear things and think, what are they doing here? What is it that's actually going on? And one of the big factors in that was that no one ever played harmony in a Masters Bay and Reel.
Yeah.
But you played them in medleys. And it's balancing the harmony along with the melody so that the melody doesn't get lost and that the harmonies fit it is really something that people have to think about, had to think about in those days.
Is there enough training given to judges about judging medleys at that time?
I would guess probably no, because they didn't have what we have now, where they had lots of online stuff. We could have a judges meeting and play stuff online, listening to different types of music. But in those days, I don't think that facility was available to them to the same extent. And I think too, that at the end of the day, who was there with enough experience to dictate to the others what they should be doing and what they should be thinking about?
There's a format within the medley now that sits, you get an opening that's followed by such and such, which is followed by such and such, which is followed by such and such. Whereas when it came out initially, Edinburgh Police, for instance, didn't play a slow air. And other people didn't do this, they didn't do that. And, they presented what their idea was of a medley. So there's a wider variation of time signatures and the inclusion or exclusion of airs, space reels, hornpipes. Was there such a thing as a hornpipe at the beginning? All this sort of thing. Now,
yeah. I remember too, and please don't think I'm trying to claim any credit for anything, because I'm just, I'm from Plantation in Glasgow, so I'm not very bright. And in the old days, every medley finished with a march of some kind. And I suggested to Ian one day that when we play a jig, just finish at the end of the jig and that's it, bang, it's gone, that's finished in that kind of high point. So that's what we did. And it's one of the things about art is the dramatic effect of it, whether it's a painting or poetry or whatever it is. You do have to have some sort of drama in there to get people's minds going, what was that, or wow, to be overwhelmed by it. And that's one of the things too that the drum corps were available for, is creating that sort of drama in it as well. And as classical music developed, with all the composers, they all come up with new ideas. And then when you start to get into the 19th century, the late 19th century into the 20th century, you could hardly hum or whistle any of the themes because they were so different from what it used to be in the past. And it would seem to me to be logical that as the medley evolved and the space to do things differently continues, then that's what's going to happen. And people will pick pieces of music because they're a bit different.
Aye.
And it's wondering whether is that important to them, or is it impact on the judges, or is it if the audience likes it? It's quite a difficult question to answer, just what you put into the food. One of my points about judging is that I tell everyone there are several things you should do. One of them is to watch Bake Off or MasterChef or something like that. And the two of us are standing there. I quite look at the cake, but it's a bit stodgy. Another one tries it and says, It's not very pretty, but it's a lovely quality about it. So there's all sorts of different things, and there's a program on Radio 3 on Saturday mornings analysing classical music for like building a library or reviewing music. And they'll take the same piece of music performed by different orchestras and different conductors and highlight things like it could be a bit livelier, or it's maybe just a bit too slow, or the sound of the strings is a bit thin for that piece of music, or whatever.
Yeah.
So I correct me if I'm wrong here, but I thought your main question was the evolution of the medley in the last 50 years.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So the World Championship there, we had a celebration, if you like, of the first World Championship winning medley by Shotts and Dykehead. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it was really interesting to watch. It was lovely to watch, actually. Nice picked tunes, nice tempos, different style, and it became. The one thing that hit me about that was that the concept of the medley is really the same as what it was 50 years ago. And what I mean by that is that everybody nowadays tries to pick nice tunes and how we all fit them together. And maybe even without knowing it back then, they were doing exactly the same thing. Just trying to pick nice tunes, how they all fit together, and look at the overall picture of the medley and the construction. And it was just a really nice set of tunes, and it made you smile. Okay, there was the whole looking back and nostalgic bit about coming about it, but it just made you sit back and just enjoy it for what it was, not looking at the competitive element of it, if that makes any sense at all.
Yes, it could. In early doors, I wrote away to RSPBA just a week or so ago, asking them for information. Of course, they never get back to me. And my question was, when was the first time a medley was played in the competition field? Because I've got a notion that we were playing medleys before that 1970 World's medley.
One of the things that hit me as well was, even without knowing it, I think everybody's got their own brand, and they each became. Everybody almost becomes identifiable by their own medleys and their own style, even if they're not trying to do it. You know, just by that comes from a personal point of view. I think, you know, of the pipe major, whoever's involved in making the medley at the time. It's just what they like, what they're tuned into, what style and brand they come across in themselves, you know. And then, so going into a wee bit deeper in that, I probably think one of the main evolutions in the medley was, I mean, so we all took tunes, and we still do nowadays, from all the prolific composers in the past: J.S. McLennan, Don McLeod, Al McDonald, Don Bradford has his own style with the bands, Mike Gray nowadays is very popular and stuff as well. But another thing that became probably in the 70s, talking to quite a few people, was the popularity of folk bands and how they actually gelled music and the tunes and the pipes all together in themselves as well. And if you listen to the likes of Bill Livingston and The Vale with Ian Duncan and all that stuff, they were very much influenced by all that music and stuff as well. And even having played in a folk band myself, having talked to the guys when the pipes were introduced and how they fitted in, and it was all new, and it was almost like the whole concept and the whole creation came about together, hand in hand. So rather than just going to the books and the odd tune you learned from somebody else, recordings would appear, and I think that also helped in the developments. Possibly subliminally, by people putting medleys together after that would maybe look more at the likes of key changes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to build the emotion within the medley and how they would put it together, and they're probably more aware of it nowadays, but even back then they would have been aware of it, and that would give you your lift. And it's almost like, the emotional trait of a medley is how to build the picture, and then obviously we all go down to the slow air to create a bit of space, and then we're building for the big finish at the end. So that's one thing I would say that's really come through the years and stuff. And obviously, with the digital recordings and the internet today, it's so much more accessible and so much easier to do. So looking at one of the first things I think when we're building a medley is it's just all about the ingredients. It's possibly the most difficult part, I would say, of putting a medley together, because it's so important, and there's certain tunes where you think, oh, that'll go great, and it doesn't really go great, and then other tunes you think, doesn't really fit in the style of what you're trying to envisage with yourselves as well. And then also the drumming as well. You need to, when you're putting the medley, there's like 2 or 3 points you really need to look at the medley for the drumming, and stuff that they can actually express themselves in, whether it's a break, a bridge, or a build, or a waltz. So all that comes into it nowadays as well. I think that's the main part that we've developed on the medleys in the last few years. But it's like everything else. Everything's got a format, and the format's changed through time as well. But one of the biggest things I think we have nowadays about building a medley is actually the time constraint.
Yes, I suppose 7 minutes, whereas in Britain they've got 11 minutes.
Yeah. It's almost, so by the time you put your opener in, you've got to get your jigs in, your reels. So whether you finish with the jigs or reels at the finish, and then you're trying to build a bit of emotion with whatever slow air you put in, by the time you put all these ingredients together, it's sometimes, well, the majority of times I find it's like, right, how can we cut time here, or how can we cut time here, but still to build the same effect. That is,
yes.
That's the difficult part, I think, about it, and the skill about it is how to create that whole effect in 7 minutes.
See if you had a different mode of entry into the medley. Instead of marching on, you had the concert semicircle. In your opinion, would that help?
I don't know, because how do you judge it?
Aye.
I'm on the fence.
Time-wise, though, that would allow you to, instead of wasting a few precious seconds marching in to form a circle with a march tune, you could maybe get right into whatever you're wanting, the theme you're wanting to get into immediately.
So there's 2 ways to look at that, I would say. One thing is, because the bagpipes is just such a constant, there's no break, and because the tonal quality is the same with 9 notes, and the pitch and the constraint, I don't know if it would make much of a difference. And again, it's just, I mean, there's various arguments on the side, and there's people saying, no, we should change it and all that, but there's strict elements within a competition sometimes, and it's how much you push these boundaries, or how far you make the restrictions, basically pushing it. And I guess I honestly think they would just have to try it and see how it goes.
I think that's what probably happened, and I'm just thinking that might be what happened at the end of the 60s, culminating in this exposure at the Worlds in 1970. I think they were trying various things because they felt, 2 or 3 folk felt, it's alleged that Shotts, McAllister's felt they had to break the mould of Muirhead's winning the MSR every year. I think that's a wee bit harsh myself. I never had that impression at the time. But given that the MSR had subsisted for, say, 50 years unchallenged, and here we are 70 years on with the medley unchallenged as a format, is perhaps time to sit around the table for 2 or 3 years or whatever, months or years, just to come up with a completely different format once again, to give fresh impetus to the art and release some new ideas into the competition field.
Yeah, there definitely is. There definitely is a different way, and some people will argue it's much better, and some people, there are traditionalists out there who just like the format is. But yeah, they would definitely have to try it and see how it goes. But yeah, definitely with regards to intros and the way we actually stand as a band. I mean, the counter argument for the way we stand as a band is that's the way you should hear the tone. The drones should be, sonorous, and the chanter shouldn't be right out there and brash. And the way we actually stand at the minute, there's a lot of people argue, that is the proper way to stand, and that's the way the bagpipe should sound. And obviously, there's a lot of people arguing against it now, saying no, we're definitely in the concert formation. So it just comes down to personal preference. I wish I had the answer, but I don't. Yeah.
I think there's been remarks made about the pipe band season finishing far too early in the middle of August. Perhaps if we brought out a sixth competition rather than interfere with the five that are there at the moment, and bring out a sixth one, and they say, right, let's try something innovative with this sixth one, which will not interfere with the format for a year or so until we settle it down, and then maybe feed it in if it was deemed to be successful. I think we've always got to evolve. We can't just be standing still. And new ideas. Lots of guys are saying there's too many bridges, there's too many harmonies, this, that, and the next thing. But I rather think that they're maybe lacking in a wee bit of imagination at times. But the debate's healthy too,
Well, I'd like to pick up on that's the one thing we haven't really spoken about, is the harmony construction.
Yeah.
So again, obviously it develops throughout the years. I think one of the main things that helps is with digital recordings nowadays. You can actually record it and you can actually listen to it back, and you can develop it that way yourself and try and create the effect you want. And the criticism you pick up in there is too much for people sometimes. And that's where it becomes difficult again. You're trying to create something which is clever, but also that people are going to be receptive to, basically. And that's the whole thing about the medley, with tune construction, medley and harmony, how you build that and how people are receptive. Some people are going to like it, some people are not going to like it. And in the last 10 years, harmonies have become more complex, very clever. Part of that's down to the music writing programs we have nowadays, and part of that's down to the recording programs we have nowadays as well.
Part of it is the knowledge of the individual pipers, who are far better educated in the art. Maybe like institutions like the National Piping Centre with piping degrees and various offshoots from all that. And I wonder, when we're maybe talking about, maybe even harking back to a sixth competition, why don't we really break the mould here and have as judges not 60 and 70-year-olds? I'm not allowed to say that because I'll be 80 in February, so I'm criticising our thing. What I'm trying to say is we've got lots of well-educated pipers and drummers with degrees, and why don't we have a bench with some of these guys for that particular occasion and just see how they would judge it, because they have the contemporary knowledge of what these bands would be trying to achieve and under this new format, and would be able to come up with some critical and educated sort of comments rather than comments from way back that are made by people who, in my opinion, are not qualified.
Yeah, but do we have enough of these guys out there? And are these guys still playing in the competitions themselves? That's,
you know, they seem to be churning out plenty of guys from the you know, the degree courses and all the rest.
Yeah.
And if you're passing a piping degree, you're not getting them just willy-nilly. It's 4 years study.
Yeah.
So they must have learned something to be able to give a critical comment. And if it doesn't work, well, it doesn't work. But it's something you could definitely have a look at. And it would refresh the judging panel, if nothing else. And the judging panels are always subject to criticism from the man in the field anyway. So what else is new, you know?
This is what happens with competition.
Right.
It's sometimes we forget it is about the enjoyment as well.
Yeah.
And because you're down the pecking order a wee bit, doesn't mean that it's bad or it's good. It just means that the person on the pencil or another band had a better tonal quality, but sometimes the music can be equally as good as if not better. And it's down to personal taste. And that's why we all take it quite badly sometimes, you know. But that's the balance between competition and actual a performance or a concert piece or something you want to put together. And we'll always overanalyze, and we'll always, you know, we'll try and make it better. It seems like we can't make it better at the moment because, as you say, that, you know, that things have stayed so the same for so long, and that would be a good idea, have a sixth competition with a more freestyle. But then it's just how far you push it and what you judge it on.
That's why you have it running for a wee while, and they tweak it here and there and all this, and say, well, that doesn't work, but this does work, and develop it in the direction it is working. And you've got to be innovative. You've got to please your audience at the end of the day. That's the whole purpose of music, is to give enjoyment to the listener. And as soon as we cease to do that, that's when we cease to have an audience.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't be frightened of our art. We should put it out there and see how it goes. And being bottom in the first grade isn't a particularly bad thing, because I think the piping is very, very healthy. First grade, second grade, even into third grade. They're all very listenable. And one of the best grades of the whole lot is a juvenile grade, actually. And you listen to the expertise that's coming up from there. It blow you away, actually. Yeah. And it's one of my favourite competitions, going to Dumbarton every year and just go along early and listen to juvenile grade. And it's absolutely sparkling. Yeah. And that's the future of the pipe bands. And I think we should be doing our best to encourage the young folk, encourage them to be their own critics and judges as well as performers. Yeah,
absolutely, I agree. But a lot of these juvenile bands are getting taught by the top guys in the grade one, and the influence there is great. And yeah, the standard's phenomenal in some of these bands, and the playing is absolutely super. I would agree with that, yeah.
Just to I think of given justice this station, just to complete the conversation, Shots and Dykehead Tribute Band displayed the fact that they returned to the original theme, the original marching tune, and it worked in a circle. So they finished the way they started, almost with the thing, but the march tune, or the opening tune, an opinion on that, and just finishing with a big bang, the reels of the jigs. What's your feeling about that?
Yeah, I mean, they're all good ideas. So maybe going on, maybe medleys should be themed, and it should be done on a certain tune or a certain theme, and you have to work within that and make that your piece. Maybe that's a way forward. But yeah, I mean, sympathetically back then, it was a lovely way of doing it. It really was, and as I say, it did do. And but it's funny. 50 years on, we're still trying to create the same effect. Something that'll give you a smile. Something that come away and say, "Oh, that was a really nice tune. I really like that as well." I mean, the main thing people do today now is relate either back to the slow air or the opener to finish in, to weave it in with your harmonies, whatever you're finishing with, to to create that effect as well. But maybe going forward, we should theme it.
Aye. Okay, we could talk about this all night, but I think we'll have to bring it to a close. Thanks
Okay,
very
Alan.
much.
Thanks, Alan.